I trusted my best friend with a life-changing secret, but when everyone in our circle found out, except me, I knew I had been left behind on purpose. My name is Eli, I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I thought loyalty was my strongest trait. I wasn't the loudest in the room or the one everyone noticed first, but I was the friend people called when things fell apart. The one who showed up when others didn't. I guess that's why, when I met Ryan, I thought I'd finally found the kind of friendship that would last forever. The kind built on real understanding, not convenience. Ryan and I met our sophomore year of college. We both worked part-time at the same campus coffee shop, pulling espresso shots and pretending we didn't care about the long lines or impossible customers. He was outgoing, confident, the type who could charm anyone without trying. I was quieter, more reserved. But we balanced each other out. He had this way of pulling people into his orbit, and I guess I liked feeling like I belonged there. After graduation, we ended up moving to the same city, Boston. It wasn't planned, but it worked out that way. Ryan got a job in advertising, I started working in IT for a financial firm, and before long, our lives were intertwined in ways that felt permanent. We shared an apartment for 2 years, spent most weekends together, and built a tight group of friends. People we met through work, through bars, through each other. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like home. If I'm honest, I never really trusted people easily. Growing up, my dad left when I was 8, and my mom raised me mostly on her own. That left me with this instinct to hold things close, to guard parts of myself until I was sure someone could be trusted. But with Ryan, it felt easy to drop that guard. He was the brother I never had. We celebrated wins together, covered for each other when things went wrong, and stayed up late talking about everything from relationships to fears about getting older. That's why, when the thing I'm about to tell you happened, it didn't just hurt. It broke something deep inside me. Because it wasn't just about what he did. It was about realizing I'd been standing next to someone for years without ever seeing what they were really capable of. It started the year I turned 32. I was going through one of the toughest periods of my life. My mother had been diagnosed with an early stage of breast cancer, and while she was handling it better than I was, it felt like my world had tilted. I didn't want to burden anyone, so I kept it quiet at first. Only a few people knew. My boss, since I had to take time off here and there, and Ryan, because he'd been like family. I told him one night at our favorite bar after work. He'd noticed something was off and pressed until I admitted it. I remember his face going still for a second, then softening. He told me we'd get through it, that I wasn't alone. And in that moment I believed him. I told him I didn't want anyone else to know, especially not in our friend circle. My mom's privacy mattered more than anything. She didn't want petty or whispers. She wanted normalcy for the next few weeks. He checked in constantly. He brought over takeout when I was too tired to cook, helped me distract myself with bad movies and late night gaming sessions. It meant more than I could ever say. I even told him once that he was the only person I trusted with the whole truth. He just laughed and said that's what friends were for. Then, slowly, things started to feel off. It began with a conversation at a party. One of our friends, Mason, pulled me aside and asked how my mom was doing. I froze. I hadn't told him, or anyone for that matter. When I asked how he knew, he shrugged and said Ryan had mentioned it weeks ago, that he thought everyone already knew. I remember laughing it off at the time, trying to convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe Ryan slipped up once. Maybe it wasn't intentional. But it didn't stop there. The next week, Tessa, another close friend from our group, texted me asking if my mom's chemo had started yet. I hadn't even told Ryan that part. My mom hadn't started treatment. She was still weighing her options. I stared at that text for a long time, my chest tightening. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called Ryan. He didn't pick up, but he texted me a few minutes later saying he was in a meeting. I told him we needed to talk. He said sure later that night. When I finally saw him, he acted like nothing was wrong. He joked about work, poured himself a drink, and asked if I wanted to watch the game. I sat there, watching him laugh, and all I could think about was how easily he could do it. How easily he could pretend. When I brought up what Mason and Tessa said, he blinked, like it was the first time he was hearing about it. Then he said he must have mentioned it by accident, that it wasn't a big deal, that people were just trying to be supportive. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But over the next month, it became obvious that my secret had turned into everyone's favorite topic. Every gathering came with subtle questions about my mom's condition. People I barely talked to started sending me messages of support. It wasn't mean-spirited. It was worse than that. It was pity disguised as kindness. It was people treating me like a walking tragedy because someone else had handed them my pain. The worst part, Ryan acted like he had no idea. Whenever I brought it up, He'd apologize just enough to make me question whether I was overreacting. He'd say things like, "You know me, man, I'd never do that on purpose." Or, "I just thought people should know so they could be there for you." I'd tell him I didn't need anyone to be there for me. I just needed my privacy respected. He'd nod, say he understood, and then do it again a week later. Looking back, I think he liked being the one who knew everything about me, the one people went to for updates. He got to play the role of the loyal best friend while casually betraying me behind the scenes. And I, like an idiot, kept forgiving him because I didn't want to lose the one person I thought I could depend on. The moment that shattered everything happened a few months later. My mom was finally in remission. We threw a small dinner at my place to celebrate, a quiet night with friends, food, and relief. My mom came by for a bit, smiling and thanking everyone for their kind words. She didn't know I hadn't told them myself. She thought I had been open about her illness. Halfway through dinner, I went into the kitchen to grab more wine, and that's when I heard it. Tessa talking to another friend about how worried Ryan had been during those early months, about how he'd shouldered so much while I was falling apart. She said it like he was the one who'd gone through everything, like he had been the hero of the story. It hit me like a punch to the chest. All those check-ins, all that supposed support, it hadn't been about helping me. It had been about curating a story where he looked good. He'd taken my most personal struggle and turned it into social currency, and he'd done it with the same easy smile he used on everyone else. That night after everyone left, I sat on my balcony staring at the city lights, my stomach twisting with anger and disbelief. For the first time in years, I didn't text him goodnight. I didn't reach out to clear the air. I didn't care what his excuse would be. Something inside me had shifted. I didn't know it yet, but that was the night our friendship started to die. The morning after that dinner, I woke up feeling like my body was full of sand. Heavy, dry, drained. I stared at my phone for a long time, half expecting a message from Ryan, maybe something casual like "great dinner last night, man." But there was nothing, just silence. I went through my day on autopilot, shower, coffee, commute, work. But my thoughts kept looping back to what I'd overheard. It wasn't just that Ryan had told people about my mom's illness. It was that he'd made it sound like he had carried the weight of it. That while I was struggling, he'd been the one holding everything together. I couldn't stop replaying the tone of Tessa's voice when she said how hard it must have been for him. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted him, "Can we talk after work?" He replied within seconds. "Sure, my place." I showed up around 7. His apartment looked the same as always, clean, warm lighting, a half-empty whiskey glass on the counter. He greeted me with that same easy smile, like nothing in the world was wrong. I didn't sit down. I didn't take off my jacket. I just looked at him and said, "Why did you tell everyone about my mom?" For the first time, his smile faltered. He rubbed the back of his neck and said he didn't realize it was such a big deal, that everyone had already sort of known, that he was just trying to help. But it was the way he said help that made my blood boil. Like what he'd done was some kind of noble act, not a betrayal. I told him I'd heard what Tessa said, about how he made it sound like he'd carried me through everything. He frowned, swore that wasn't true, said people twisted things. Then he got defensive. He said I should be grateful that people cared, that at least they were being supportive instead of pretending nothing had happened. That's when something inside me snapped. I told him he didn't have the right to decide how or when people learned about something that wasn't his to share. That my mother trusted me to protect her privacy, and I trusted him to do the same. He just stared at me for a moment, jaw tight, then muttered that maybe I was being too sensitive. Sensitive. That word stuck in my chest like a blade. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The air outside was freezing, biting against my face, but it felt cleaner than anything inside that apartment. I remember walking for nearly an hour, no destination in mind, just moving because stopping meant thinking. Over the next few weeks, I distanced myself. I stopped going to our group hangouts, muted the chat we all shared, and ignored Ryan's attempts to reach out. He sent texts that went from apologetic to frustrated to downright guilt-trippy. Things like "I didn't mean to hurt you, man," "then you can't stay mad forever," and "finally you're acting like I killed someone." I never replied, but silence, I learned, has its own consequences. Without me around to defend myself, Ryan started shaping the story again, this time about our friendship. I didn't realize it at first, not until Mason called me one night. He said he'd seen Ryan at a bar the night before, that Ryan had mentioned we weren't talking because I'd taken things too personally, that I'd been emotionally unstable lately and pushing people away. Mason said it like he didn't believe it entirely, but the doubt was there. I could hear it in his voice. It hit me then. Ryan wasn't content just to betray me once. He needed to stay the hero, even if it meant painting me as the villain. After that, everything I heard about our friend group came secondhand. The inside jokes I used to be part of, the weekend plans I used to help organize, they all went on without me. My absence was barely a blip, and yet I couldn't bring myself to try to explain what had happened. Part of me still wanted to believe that this was just a misunderstanding, that maybe he didn't mean it the way it looked. But another part, the quieter, wiser part, knew that people don't accidentally betray you multiple times. They choose to. One night about a month later, I ran into him by accident. I was coming out of a grocery store when I heard my name. When I turned, there he was, wearing that same smirk I'd once thought of as harmless. He looked me over like I was an old friend he hadn't seen in years instead of the person he'd burned to the ground. He asked how I'd been, how my mom was doing, if I was still holding that grudge. I told him my mom was fine and started to walk away, but he stepped in front of me. He said he missed how things used to be, that we shouldn't throw away years of friendship over a misunderstanding. I remember staring at him, really staring, and realizing I didn't even recognize him anymore. The man I thought I knew wouldn't have said any of that. He wouldn't have trivialized what he'd done or turned it into something I was supposed to get over. I told him I didn't think he understood what trust meant, that when you share something sacred with someone, it's not theirs to trade for sympathy or attention. I said I didn't hate him. I just didn't know him anymore. He didn't like that. His expression hardened, and he muttered that I was making myself miserable for no reason, that everyone else had moved on. Then he walked away, leaving me standing there with a bag of groceries and a hole in my chest. After that night, I stopped hearing from him altogether. The group chats went silent. Mutual friends stopped reaching out. It was like I'd been erased from the map of my own life. For a while, I thought I deserved it. That maybe I really had overreacted. That maybe I should have handled it differently. But guilt fades when the truth doesn't. About 3 months later, I found out something that erased whatever lingering doubt I had. I was out with a coworker, Liam, grabbing drinks after work. We'd both had rough weeks and were venting about everything. Bad bosses, worse clients, life in general. At one point, he mentioned knowing Ryan through mutual friends and laughed about how that guy could spin anything into his favor. When I asked what he meant, he hesitated, then said Ryan had mentioned me once, apparently telling people I'd had a breakdown because of family issues and that he'd been trying to keep an eye on me. That's when it all clicked. He hadn't just told people about my mom. He'd built an entire story around it, a version of events where he was the concerned friend trying to help his unstable buddy. He'd turned my pain into his reputation, my silence into proof of his loyalty. That realization made me sick. Literally, I left the bar, went home, and sat in the dark for hours, my heart racing. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what this said about me. About how easily I'd trusted someone who could twist something so personal into a narrative for sympathy. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed our entire friendship from the beginning, every conversation, every joke, every secret shared. I kept asking myself when the turning point happened, when he stopped being my friend and started being someone who used me to make himself look good. And the worst part was realizing that maybe there was no turning point. Maybe that's who he was the whole time, and I just refused to see it. The weeks that followed felt like a slow unraveling of everything I thought I understood about loyalty and friendship. My world became quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the silence that followed a storm, the kind that leaves debris scattered everywhere waiting for someone to clean it up. I started noticing how deeply interwoven Maya had been in every aspect of my life. My messages went unanswered, but worse, I realized I had no one else I truly confided in. The other friends in our circle had drifted to her side. Or maybe they'd always been there, and I just hadn't noticed how peripheral I really was. One afternoon, I saw them all sitting at a cafe I used to go to with her. I hadn't gone there since the fallout, but I happened to be walking by on my way from work. There they were, Maya, Liam, Jen, and the others, laughing like nothing had ever changed. For a brief second, my heart lurched like I might go over and say hi, pretend everything was fine. But then I saw Maya lean in to whisper something to Liam, and they both started laughing. I knew that laugh. It was the same one we used to share when an inside joke landed. The realization hit like ice. That laugh didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't go inside. I just kept walking, my reflection in the cafe window distorted by the glare of the afternoon sun. I looked like someone older, smaller somehow. That night, I sat in my apartment and tried to understand what had gone wrong. Was I really such a bad friend? Or had Maya been waiting for an excuse to push me out? The questions spiraled endlessly, and no matter how I turned them around, I couldn't find a version of events that made sense. Eventually, I decided to talk to her, not to accuse, not to beg, just to find out why. Closure, I told myself, but really, I think I still wanted her to say something that would fix everything. I texted her a short message, "Can we talk?" It took her 3 hours to respond. Sure. Tomorrow evening, same cafe. When I got there, she was already sitting down, looking at her phone. She looked the same, but I didn't feel the same around her. There was a small wall between us now, invisible but solid. She looked up, smiled faintly, and said hey, like we hadn't gone months without speaking. We started with small talk, though neither of us cared about the weather or work. Finally, I said what I'd been rehearsing. I told her I didn't care about the secret being out. I just didn't understand why she had to tell everyone. Why she couldn't come to me first. Why I had to find out from whispers instead of her. She took a breath and looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. That it slipped out one night. That people asked her questions and she didn't know how to dodge them. But as she spoke, her tone shifted. She said she'd been tired of keeping it for me, that I'd put her in a difficult position, that she'd felt used. Like I only came to her when I needed to unload my problems. I remember staring at her, trying to process those words. Use it. After all the nights I'd been there for her, after her breakup with Liam, after her father's illness, after her job fell through, I had been the one sitting next to her, reminding her she wasn't alone. The words tasted bitter in my mouth when I said them aloud. She looked me straight in the eye and said maybe that's what friendship had become for us. A one-way street. That maybe I was more dependent on her than I realized. I didn't know what to say. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had leaned too much on her. But wasn't that what friendship was supposed to be? A place to fall back on. The conversation ended in fragments. Neither of us yelled. We just stopped. She said she wished me the best, that maybe some space would be good. I nodded, paid for both our coffees out of habit, and walked out. The air outside was cool, but my chest burned. I knew in that moment it was over, not just the argument, but the friendship itself. The first few days afterward felt like quitting an addiction. I'd go to text her something funny only to stop halfway through. I'd scroll through old messages, through photos of us at music festivals, birthdays, even boring grocery store runs that had somehow been fun with her. Every memory carried a weight now, each one whispering that maybe I should have been better, or maybe I had been too good for too long. But something unexpected started happening. Without her constant presence, the noise in my head began to clear. I realized how much of my identity had become wrapped around being her friend. Being the one who understood her moods, who showed up when she needed something. I'd been defining myself by someone else's orbit, and when she cut me loose I had no idea who I was without that gravity. So, I started small. I joined a local photography group, something I'd always wanted to do but never found time for. The first meeting, I barely spoke. I just listened to people talk about light and shadow, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I belonged somewhere without trying. A few weeks later, one of the members, a woman named Clara, invited me to join them for a photo walk on Saturday. I almost said no, old habits, I guess, but I went. It felt strange being around people who didn't already know my past, my secret, or the cracks left behind by a broken friendship. It was freeing in a quiet, unfamiliar way. At one point, as we stood by the river taking pictures, Clara turned to me and asked what I liked most about photography. I said it was the stillness. That moment when you frame something just right and realize you've captured it as it is, not as you wish it were. She smiled and said that was beautiful. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd said something true that wasn't tinged with regret. Still, nights were hard. There were times I'd lie awake, thinking about Maya, wondering if she ever thought about me too, not out of guilt, but just out of memory. We'd shared so much, surely some part of her missed it too. But as days turned into weeks, the thought started losing its grip. The hurt dulled. Then, one evening, I got a message from her. Just one line: "I saw one of your photos. You've gotten really good." No apology, no attempt at reconnection. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to reply, to tell her about the group, about how I'd finally submitted a few shots to an exhibit. But then I stopped. I realized I didn't owe her an update on my life anymore. So I just typed thank you and left it at that. For once, it felt enough. What surprised me wasn't how easy it was to move on. It was how hard I had been holding on to something that had already ended long before I admitted it. Maya had betrayed my trust, yes. But the deeper truth was that our friendship had been breaking long before the secret got out. That moment had only revealed what was already dying. It's strange, though losing your best friend isn't like a breakup. There's no social script, no clear moment when it's over. It just fades like a photograph left in the sun, colors slowly draining until all that's left is an outline of what used to be. And yet, even as it fades, part of you still keeps it, because once it was real. And that's the part that's hardest to let go of. Would you like me to continue with part 4's final part, 6,000 of characters? The emotional resolution and reflection of how he finally rebuilds his life and trust. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I could achieve without Maya. At first, it was awkward. Mornings where I would instinctively reach for my phone to text her, only to stop. Nights when I wanted to share something funny or a minor victory, and realized there was no one waiting for my call. The silence was deafening, and for a while I doubted myself. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe the friendship wasn't truly lost, but slowly, the space I'd created began to feel like freedom and not emptiness. Photography became my anchor. I spent weekends exploring abandoned buildings, capturing the interplay of light and decay, or walking along the Charles River to catch the sunset reflecting off the water. In those moments, I realized I could experience joy, beauty, and connection without being tethered to someone else's narrative. I started sharing my work with a few online communities, small forums of photographers who critiqued, encouraged, and celebrated each other's progress. Their feedback felt honest, unsullied by past dynamics, and it reminded me that recognition and validation didn't have to come from people who'd betrayed my trust. Through the photography community, I met a handful of people who slowly became real friends. Derek, a landscape photographer, became someone I could text at 2 a.m. about composition or post-processing techniques. Sophie, a local art student, encouraged me to submit my photos to a gallery exhibit, something I'd been hesitant to do for fear of failure or judgment. Unlike the circle I'd shared with Maya, these connections were built on shared interests and mutual respect, not history, convenience, or manipulation. It was a revelation to realize that friendships could exist on the terms of authenticity rather than obligation or expectation. And yet, the past refused to vanish entirely. Every so often, I'd hear something about Maya from someone in our old group, a passing comment or an innocuous social media post. She had moved on quickly, it seemed. Parties, trips, new friends. Her life had resumed as though my presence had been a minor inconvenience, a footnote in her story. Part of me ached at the realization that she hadn't mourned what we hadn't acknowledged the depth of what our friendship meant to me. And yet, the pain was tempered by clarity. I no longer needed her recognition to validate my experiences or my worth. One evening, as I was editing photos from a recent urban exploration, I realized that my perspective had shifted completely. I wasn't the same person who had entrusted Maya with my deepest secret, naive in the belief that loyalty was sacred and universal. I had learned, painfully, that trust could be weaponized, that people could betray without malice, simply for attention or validation. But I had also learned something far more important: I could rebuild, redefine myself, and create meaningful connections without depending on someone else to be my mirror. I even allowed myself a moment of humor about it, remembering how I'd once thought our inside jokes, late-night talks, and shared struggles made us inseparable. The irony was almost funny now. I had spent so much energy caring for a friendship that had already been fracturing beneath the surface. My anger had been justified, but it had also blinded me to the possibility that life could go on without her. The gallery exhibit Sophie encouraged me to enter was a turning point. I submitted 10 photos, selected to tell a story of solitude, loss, and eventual light, unknowingly mirroring my own emotional journey. On the night of the opening, as strangers wandered past my work, commenting, asking questions, and genuinely engaging with what I had created, I felt a validation that was different from anything Maya could have provided. It wasn't about loyalty or obligation, it was about authenticity, effort, and the story my life had actually lived. During the exhibit, a woman approached me and asked about a photo of an empty pier at dawn. I explained how I had taken it on a morning when I was grappling with betrayal and uncertainty. She nodded thoughtfully, saying that sometimes the quietest moments speak the loudest. I smiled, realizing she had no idea that I was speaking about a friend who had betrayed me, about the months of pain, doubt, and isolation I had endured. And yet, my experience had been transformed into something that could resonate with another person. That was when I understood the most important lesson: what happens to you, even betrayals and losses, can be transformed into meaning beyond the person who caused the pain. I continued to cultivate my life in small, intentional ways. I volunteered at a local community center on weekends, teaching photography to teens who didn't have access to equipment or guidance. I found that mentoring them reminded me why I had chosen to be someone people could depend on, without expecting anything in return. It was pure, unselfish, and it allowed me to experience trust in a safe and rewarding environment. Months turned into a year. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more discerning. When the thought of Maya crossed my mind, it no longer triggered anger or sadness, only a quiet acknowledgement that she had been part of my past, important, meaningful, but no longer defining. I realized that friendships are like mirrors, some reflect the best of who you are, some distort it, and some break completely. The challenge, I understood now, is to recognize which mirrors are worth keeping. Eventually, I started dating again. Not recklessly, not in search of someone to fill the void left by betrayal, but because I was ready to trust carefully, intentionally. Each step was cautious, deliberate, but also filled with a sense of possibility I hadn't felt when my world had revolved around someone else's validation. I was learning to navigate life without leaning on someone whose presence had ultimately been conditional, and in doing so, I discovered a deeper, more resilient sense of self. In retrospect, losing Maya, the betrayal, the silences, the abandonment, became the catalyst for everything I needed to discover about myself. It forced me to see clearly, to examine my choices, to understand that trust is valuable precisely because it is rare and fragile, and while I'll never forget the hurt, I also won't forget the freedom that came after it, the freedom to create my own path, to cultivate relationships that honored mutual respect, and to reclaim the narrative of my life from someone who tried to rewrite it for their own gain. That night, as I walked home from a late photo session, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, I realized I was smiling genuinely, quietly, completely. For the first time in months, I felt whole, not because I had reconciled with Maya or because my old friends had validated me, or because I had been proved right. I felt whole because I had survived, learned, and rebuilt. I had taken the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the quiet erasure of my existence in someone else's story, and I had made it mine. And that, I realized, was more powerful than any friendship I had ever lost.